One. Okay, welcome to The Cutting Edge with Dr. Lee Pearson and Dr. Bob Stubblefield. And we're continuing the discussion on concepts of consciousness. And Lee's going to give us some motivation and some recap. And probably Bob has some recap as well from our last show, because this is our second session and this may not be the last. So over to Lee.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you, Steve. So this week we're calling it, I titled this, Focused Thinking About Concepts of Consciousness. And the reason I put the term focused thinking, it's a term for what I teach, which is a method for going beyond what comes to your mind automatically, or by just trying harder, actually, but mainly automatically, when that has left your thinking stuck, confused, or overloaded, or wandering. What do you do? In other words, what do you do when you don't know what to do, basically? And the method of focused thinking entails identifying and directing attention specifically to key concepts that have slipped by too quickly, or maybe not at all when they should have been attended to, either in comprehension here, or if it's problem solving and solving a problem, or decision making, key concepts can slip by. Analyzing arguments, key concepts can slip by. So actually, basically, in any form of cognition, a verbal cognition anyway, any form of verbal cognition, key concepts can slip by too quickly, basically because of automatization. And I can explain this some other time. I'll do a lecture on focused thinking in relation to volition and automatization, and I'll do that. But for now, we're just going to exemplify it. We're going to go ahead, continue to try to comprehend the difficult material in the chapter on concepts of consciousness and Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. That's chapter 4 for those of you who might want to follow along with it in your own book. But Steve's going to put it up on the screen. And we are just using the parts of that chapter. Essentially, we're using the parts that are reproduced in the Ayn Rand lexicon, Harry Binswanger's Ayn Rand lexicon, which is on the internet. So we're using stuff that is already available on the internet, I think, in order to not step on anyone's copyright toes. So we're going to do that. But that turns out, I think, to be enough to illustrate. I want to illustrate some principles of focused thinking as we do it. The main thing that I mentioned last time and applies this time as well is to be on the lookout for inklings, feelings about thoughts, about particular specific sections, concepts, or maybe phrases that seem to be slipping by too quickly, or there seems to be an issue. You get a feeling about it often. Often you get a feeling that's kind of like a rock in your shoe. It's a feeling that something is not quite hanging together. It's a feeling of not integrating. And when you have that feeling, that's a signal, as it were, from your brain to your mind, or you want to put it another way, from your subconscious to your conscious, to, please refocus me, because the brain or the subconscious cannot refocus itself. You need to do it volitionally. So that's why we pay attention. We'll be paying attention to those things and recommending that. So we're going to illustrate that. We're also going to try to understand the chapter. That's our purpose. But there's an underlying purpose, and that is we're trying to develop some material for Bob. He wants to further give us a further rejoinder to my assertion that the subconscious is just neural processes, is physical, is basically the brain. I mean, that's an oversimplification, but it's basically physical in nature. And Bob wants to object to that, has objected to it, but he wants to shall we say, deepen that objection. And I think I know what he's going to do. And therefore, I'm ready for it, I think. But I could be wrong. So we'll see what happens. But we've got, several things going on here at once. So we better get going. Let's get onto it. So, Steve, can we, we've already read some of this material last week. We read and went through. So I want to just go ahead and read, but say less. So, for example, we did the first 3 paragraphs here last week, but I'm going to go ahead and read them. Bob, if you or Steve want to comment along the way, the first 3 paragraphs, go ahead, or stop me. But I'm just going to read these first paragraphs, three, because I said what I had to say about them last week. Okay, so we have the chapter, Concepts of Consciousness, and it starts with, consciousness is the faculty of awareness, the faculty of perceiving that which exists. Awareness is not a passive state, but an active process. On the lower levels of awareness, a complex neurological process is required to enable man to experience a sensation and to integrate sensations into percepts. Again, I'm not going to make my commentary here. That process is automatic and non-volitional. Man is aware of its results, but not of the process itself. On the higher conceptual level, the process is psychological, conscious, and volitional. In either case, awareness is achieved and maintained by continuous action. Directly or indirectly, every phenomenon of consciousness is derived from one's awareness of the external world. And we all agreed on that one. Some object, i.e. some content, and I'm not going to, I had some discussion of this last week, which I will not repeat, is involved in every state of awareness. Extrospection is a process of cognition directed outward, a process of apprehending some existence of the external world. Introspection, boy, I tried to use my finger to change it, but it's Steve's finger. Go ahead, Steve. Introspection is a process of cognition directed inward, a process of apprehending one's own psychological actions in regard to some existence of the external world. Such actions as thinking, feeling, reminiscing, etc. So here are some actions that we are aware of, that we form concepts of consciousness in relation to or about. It is only in relation to the external world that the various actions of a consciousness can be experienced, grasped, defined, or communicated. Awareness is awareness of something. A contentless state of awareness of consciousness is a contradiction in terms. Well, I'm sure many people are familiar with this from, for example, Galt's speech. Okay, now we've got to a point. I don't think I don't believe we analyzed this next paragraph, so I may slow down and see if I have any inklings or other reasons to analyze it. Okay, good, thanks. Oops.
Second.
Okay. All right. Here, I've got that part at least. I can at least get started here.
Okay.
Two
so
fundamental attributes.
Okay. Sorry, Lee, for interrupting. I just put it on continuous scrolling.
Oh, okay, good.
Because I changed it to.
Yeah, good. That's better. That's better. Okay. Two fundamental attributes are involved in every state, aspect, or function of man's consciousness. So I'm thinking to myself, this is going to be important. That's my inkling at the moment. This is going to be important. So here they are, content and action. The content of awareness and the action of consciousness in regard to that content. Well, content we've already identified earlier as being in this context. She's using that to mean the object, what it is you are, the thing in the world, the existent, the thing that's existing out there as the content. And the action of consciousness, we've got a few examples of, are things like thinking and reminiscing. All right, so those are two things that are involved in every state, aspect or function of man's consciousness, she's saying. Then she says these two attributes are the fundamental conceptual common denominator of all concepts pertaining to consciousness. Now, do we want to say, Bob, you want to say something about conceptual common denominator or not?
No.
Okay.
No, I guess like an overview is that previously she's discussed concepts, and now we're contrasting the concepts that we've discussed previously with concepts of consciousness. And of course,
yes,
when you talk about the table or chair or length or things like that, she pointed out that there is a conceptual common denominator, that you form the concept by omitting the measurements along that conceptual common denominator.
By differentiating.
So now she's telling us that just like the concepts of external things, there's a conceptual common denominator that is used in forming concepts of consciousness.
Yeah, that's a dimension along which we differentiate the various things from each other, the various concepts of consciousness from each other. Okay, and that's it's a very different conceptual common denominator than those that exist for existential concepts. I'm sure that's an important point, especially for Bob. All right, should I go on to the next paragraph?
Yes.
Okay, on the perceptual level of awareness, a child merely experiences and performs various psychological processes. All right, I'm thinking to myself, I want to know what some of these, I mean, I know, but I want to hear about some examples of these things. But I guess we have, it's the same, merely experience some of the processes. Let me go ahead and find out if I can get some examples. His full conceptual development requires that he learn to conceptualize them. Merely experiences and performs various. So I'm thinking of something like attention, some kinds of memory, perhaps. I mean, these are things that occur on the perceptual level. His full conceptual development requires that he learns to conceptualize them after he has reached a certain stage in his extrospective conceptual development. So the idea there, I think, is that you have to see things in the world before you can start identifying them in your mind and identifying what you're doing in your mind about those things in the world. Well, it's just a point she's already made in different ways. All right, I'm going to go ahead unless Bob or Steve wants to. You can stop me anytime, guys. There's an arrow.
One thing out of that is after he has reached a certain stage.
Yes.
What is that stage?
Yeah, that's a good question. And she may not want to try to be too specific about that because that's developmental psychology after all. And so she's noting that it has to happen. It must occur at some time, but defining what year it is a task for, Montessori, or if there were a better guy instead of Piaget, it would be Piaget. An educator or a psychologist is the one who really ought to be identifying that. So I think that's what's going on here. Okay, to form concepts of consciousness, one must isolate the action from the content. Okay, so I'm going to just stop for a second there. The actions are these things like thinking and reminiscing, and the content, again, are the objects. So you want to isolate the action because the action is what your concept of consciousness is really about. It's about an action on a content, but it's a focus on the action. Whereas in extrospection, your focus is on the content. In introspective conceptualization, which is what concepts of consciousness are, you're focusing on an action, on some kind of action, and the content is, you could use the word omitted. I tend to think of it more as being in the background because it still exists. The word, this is a whole other subject, and maybe we shouldn't get into it right now. But so I'll just say that the content still exists, but what you are paying attention to in the foreground is the action when you're talking about concepts of consciousness. And an action could be something like thinking and reminiscing. And Bob wants to add. Go ahead.
Well, it's you don't omit the fact that there is content, but you omit the measurement of what the content is.
You omit the measurements. Okay. Yeah, I think that's a good way. That's a good way of putting it. That is a good way of putting it. All right. So where am I? I was just in a comma. By a process of abstraction. Oh, you do it by abstraction, yes. Just as extrospectively, man can abstract attributes of entities, so introspectively, he can abstract the actions of his consciousness from its contents and observe the differences among these various actions. Now, there we go. I love to see the words for instance, and here they are. For instance, on the adult level, and that's where we ought to speak here, I think, as much as possible. When a man sees a woman walking down the street, oh, good, we're going to get examples of the actions. The action of his consciousness is perception. When he notes that she is beautiful, the action of his consciousness is evaluation. When he expresses an inner state of pleasure and approval, of admiration, the action of his consciousness. Thank you, Steve. The action of his consciousness is emotion. He experiences a state of pleasure and approval. Yeah, okay, I'll buy that. When he stops to watch her and draw conclusions from the evidence about her character, age, social position, etc. The action of his consciousness is thought. When later he recalls the incident, the action of his consciousness is reminiscence. So when you in reminiscence, I guess you're intentionally remembering something. Is that intention? I'm going to say yes, but anyway, intentional remembering. When he projects that her appearance would be improved if her hair were blonde rather than brown, okay, well, that's some preferences, and her dress were blue rather than red, again, that's preference, the action of his consciousness is imagination. So if you imagine the person in a way that's contrary to her actual identity, that is, if her hair is brown, but you imagine that she was blonde, and if she's wearing a red dress and you imagine it magically turning blue, you're imagining. Okay, imagination. He can also observe anything else you want to say there? That's good. I like that. Okay.
Yeah, let's go back and focus on that paragraph a little bit.
Okay.
Contrast this with forming concepts of existence. There, your first level concepts of existence are of objects, and you abstract attributes, relationships, and actions, etc. Now we're in the area of...
Although, let me just interject one thing. Although that's true, it's complicated by the fact that you can perceive attributes.
Yes.
And so it's even though you have to conceptualize them, so this is this issue of what's first level, and maybe we shouldn't go down. Maybe I shouldn't put us down this pathway. So I will just stop there. But go ahead, Bob. Go ahead.
Well, if you were not aware of the attribute, you wouldn't be able to abstract away from the object to get to the attribute. So the point about first level is that you identify the object first, even though you see the attributes, the relationships, and all the other things almost simultaneously.
Right. Okay.
So that the first level is the object, and later levels include actions and relationships, etc.
And other things. Okay. Right.
Now, this is the start of conceptual hierarchy. You have to conceptualize objects before you conceptualize attributes. That's out in the real world. Now we're talking about concepts of consciousness. And what are the first things we introspect about? It's not about objects. We're omitting measurements of objects. We're focused on the action of consciousness. So we talk about similarities and differences in concepts of existence versus concepts of consciousness. This, I think, is a significant thing to focus on, that the first level concepts of consciousness are actions of consciousness.
Yeah, I think we talked about a little bit about this last time.
Well, we got a lot of static from somebody who didn't like my using the word fundamental.
Well,
difference between these two.
Let me try something else. Let me bring up something else. We did discuss this a little bit, but I want to go around a little more about it. Ayn Rand uses the term mental entity for certain phenomena of consciousness. What phenomena of consciousness does she use that term for?
Well, her thoughts.
I mean, let me be more direct. I'll try to be more direct. Would she use that, because I'm not even sure myself, but would she use that to describe actions of consciousness? Would she call those things, some of those things anyway, mental entities?
Yes.
Okay, so there is something, that being the case, there is something that is corresponding to the notion of object.
Yes.
In the concepts of consciousness, even though it's not exactly the same, because, and we already covered this last week, she goes to great length to explain that a mental entity is not really an entity in the fundamental sense of the term, which refers to something out in existence.
Yes.
And as a material object, basically. She uses the term, I would say, because we don't have exact terminology for this. It's a kind of analogy, but she's very explicit about that. So in any case, that's the stand-in for object here. Is mental things that are mental entities are the stand-ins for objects when we're dealing with these concepts of consciousness. Would you agree there, Bob?
Yes. And the first levels are actions of consciousness. Those are the mental entities.
Yep. Okay, good. Anything else anything else before I move forward here? All right, Steve, where are you? Let me see. Good. Okay. I think that's where I am. He can also observe the similarities among the actions of his consciousness on various occasions. And I'll stop there because this is, again, in parallel to what you do in extrospective cognition. It's based on the observation of similarity. He can observe the similarities among the actions of his consciousness on various occasions by observing the fact that these same actions in different sequences, combinations, and degrees have been, or can be applicable to other objects, to a man, a dog, an automobile, or the entire street. Now, I don't know, I lost something here. I was okay with the man and the dog, but what are we talking about? Man, dog, automobile, and entire street. I'm going to have to look. Let's see. He observed the similar actions. Oh, because those are the objects. Those are the objects that he's aware of. Okay, it's not what's aware. It's not who is aware, but what is the object that you're being aware about, and it can be any of those sorts of things. And she's giving the range. Okay, the reading of a book, the learning of a new skill, the choice of a job. So there's a very wide range of things, both existential and conscious, that can be the objects within the scope of this kind of awareness. Any object within the scope of awareness, you can talk about the action of consciousness with respect to that object. Okay. Anything else you want to say about that, Bob?
Well, it is interesting that the object can be external or internal.
Yes.
So
yeah, I agree. That is interesting.
An extra level of indirectness when you go to the internal.
Yeah, because you can talk about the action of your consciousness on an object that's in consciousness.
Yes.
The learning of a new skill, the reading of a book, the choice of a job, those things are not external entities. So that is interesting. All right, I'm going to go ahead, I guess. Such is the pattern of the process by which, in slower gradual steps, man learns to form concepts of consciousness. Okay, so she's just saying, I just told you how we do it. In the realm of introspection, I think we actually talked about this paragraph, maybe because it was out of order, but I'm not actually certain. So anyway, I'm going to read it because I'm just going to go through the whole thing here. In the realm of introspection, the concretes, the units, which are integrated into a single concept, are the specific instances of a given psychological process. So I saw a tree today. I saw another tree yesterday. I saw a third tree day before yesterday. And pretty soon I've got something that I can talk about perception from. I have specific examples. Yes.
Yeah. Well, your examples. You saw a tree. You saw a dog. You saw.
Maybe. Yeah. Maybe I could. Yeah. You could widen the range of that. Of course, you could widen the range of that. So you had all kinds of different episodes of perception with different perceptual objects. I was thinking of different trees, but of course you do want to widen. The world does not consist merely of trees, despite what dogs seem to think. Okay, so
and maybe we should extend further and say, I thought about a woman, I thought about a dog, I thought about a book, I thought about thinking about a book.
Yeah. Okay. So there are the particular concrete instances of cognitive activities, or they're not even just cognitive activities. I felt this emotion. I felt I felt hate today, and I felt love yesterday, and I felt pity the day before, not necessarily even that far apart, but all of these things, there are particular experiences that you integrate together to form the concept of a particular psychological process. Again, that's very much in parallel with the forming the concepts of the external world.
Yes.
The measurable attributes of a psychological process are its object or content and its intensity. Now, again, there's some things I would discuss further about object versus content, but I don't think they're too relevant to our current discussion. And I mentioned them last week, so I'm not going to belabor that point right now, but we'll go ahead. Object and intensity. Intensity, of course, there's some obvious cases. You can talk about the intensity of emotion. Everybody can relate to, you have a sort of a weak emotion and a very strong emotion. That would be intensity. Thinking is a little different, but yeah, you can talk about an intense thought process. Generally, I think that would mean a process with more steps than a less intense, but there might be other aspects to it. Just the amount of mental effort you have to apply would be the intensity of say, a thought process, or maybe even a memorial process. How hard was it for you to remember it? So, okay, I'm going to go ahead. The content is some aspect of the external world, yeah, or is derived from some aspect of the external world, which again is a reference to the fact that you can have an action of consciousness on an object in consciousness, as we discussed before. Okay. And is measurable by the various methods of measurement applicable to the external world. So when you were talking about the object, or which object and content here, we can discuss objects as being so many pounds, or so many inches, or so many seconds. Physical measurement applies to those things. You got any comments on that, or no? Okay. The intensity of a psychological process is the automatically summed up result of many factors. Okay, I was trying to think about this before, so maybe she's going to give me something more to work with here. The automatically summed up result of many factors. Sure. Scope. So if you're thinking about something that's very narrow in scope as opposed to highly generalized about the whole universe, that's one element. Clarity, something that's very clear versus vague and foggy. Cognitive and motivational context, well, that itself is a number of different things. Whether you're strongly motivated to think about it or weakly motivated, you have to make yourself do it. The degree of mental energy or effort, well, I mentioned that. Mental effort is, you can exert more or less mental effort on different tasks require you to exert more or less mental effort. I'm going to go ahead, unless you have anybody wants to comment. There is no exact method of measuring the intensity of all psychological processes. Well, I think we saw this paragraph maybe, or something, that this statement before. My comment was, if you look in books on measurement and statistics, they will discuss various levels of measurement. And it's not so much that I wouldn't have said not exact. I would have just said, well, some things can only be measured in an ordinal way, and some things can be measured in an interval way, and some things can be measured in a ratio way. Those are the terms I remember from books on this that I've seen on this subject. And you can give an exact order of this was harder to do than A was harder to do than B, and B was harder to do than C, but it's not exact in the same way that if you can give it a numerical value, and particularly a numerical value on a scale with a 0, that's maybe you could say that's more exact. But in any case, the stuff that's in the things that we measure in psychology, well, in concepts of consciousness. So let me say that these are mostly, if not all, ordinal. I don't know. Let me go ahead. We need examples. But as in the case, yes.
Well, there's one thought that's far afield, but it's interesting.
Okay.
And that is that we're talking about the measurements of the psychological processes of me or you. But then when we start comparing my psychological process to yours, can we say, well, mine was more intense than yours was? In some
That's
cases,
hard to do.
Right, right. So
that's hard to do. That's
if
because
we
we have
bring this, if we take this out to utilitarianism, we say, wait a minute, you can't go there from here.
Yeah, true. Now there was a whole field that's not so active anymore in psychology called psychophysics, which was an attempt to measure relate the intensity to measure psychological processes in relation to physical variables. So, for example, you turn on a light and you try to judge how intense it is in experience, and that field is kind of pretty much disappeared for various reasons. But there was an actual attempt, and they did have some laws. Some people said there was a log function. Some people said there was a power function that related the physical stimulus to the experience. And no, it wasn't totally ridiculous. It was just more or less a sterile activity. Anyway, you can say that one light. You can talk about the experience of one light being more intense than the experience of another light. You can certainly do that, and we can certainly also say that, generally speaking, if you have a light and at higher wattage versus a light at lower wattage, that both you and I will experience the higher wattage light as brighter than the lower wattage. Even though we're two different people, we both experience it that way. Now, whether our experiences are exactly the same or not, that's another question. We can pretty much do at least that much. We can do a lot of showing. We can show that we differentiate things very similarly. For all we know, philosophers like to use this silly example. For all we know, Bob, when you see red, I see green, and vice versa. At least I doubt that that's true, but that we don't really know. I don't really know what your experience of green is, but we both differentiate the two similarly. We differentiate. We can see the difference. I'm assuming you're not red-green colorblind, are you, Bob?
No.
Okay, so that's a complication, but we can differentiate them. All right. Anyway, that's an interesting, as you say. I think it's a side issue. I've lost my place. Let me see here. Does not require. Okay, I don't know. In the case, I think it was
no exact measure. That's the word we got off.
Yeah, I just stopped right at the top there. But as in the case of forming concepts of colors, conceptualization does not require the knowledge of exact measurements. Again, my term for exact would be something like interval or ratio level measurements. Degrees of intensity can be and are measured approximately on a comparative scale. All right, again, that's what I'm calling ordinal. For instance, the intensity of the emotion of joy in response to certain facts varies according to the importance of these facts in one's hierarchy of values. All right, the more valuable something is, the more intense the joy I'm going to get out of getting it or achieving it. Sure. It varies in such cases as buying a new suit, getting a raise in pay, or marrying the person one loves. And that for me would be looks like the right hierarchy there. The intensity of a process of thought and of the intellectual effort required varies according to the scope of its content. It varies when one grasps the concept table, which is a low-level concept, the concept justice, which is a much more abstract concept. So it's a contrast. When one grasps that 2 + 2 is 4, which is, again, a lower-level concept, or that E = MC squared, which is considerably more advanced and wider scale, because that's physics. That's not just math. Okay, I'm okay with that. Anything else about that? Those are good examples. The formation of introspective concepts follows the same principles as the formation of extrospective concepts. Well, we've already said that a couple of times, so I guess we and you agreed and I agree. So, okay. A concept pertaining to consciousness is a mental integration of two or more instances of a psychological process possessing the same distinguishing characteristics. Right? Now, what would these distinguishing characteristics? Well, I'm going to we'll get more examples here, I'm sure, coming up. With the particular contents and the measurements of the action's intensity omitted. Okay, so when we form a concept of joy, we are omitting the measurements of really intense joy versus much less intense joy to get the concept of joy.
And we're also omitting what the joy is about.
And what it's about. That's also true. She's on the principle. Okay, that's true. That's not what she's saying here, but that's true. On the principle that these omitted measurements must exist in some quantity, but may exist in any quantity. Well, that's the general principle of concept formation. So, and it applies here as well. I.e., a given psychological process must possess some content. So anytime you perceive, you have to be perceiving something. And some degree of intensity. It could be, a very clear and overpowering perception, or maybe a very vague and not so powerful perception. So I'm trying to use perception here as an example. Some degree of intensity, but may possess any content or degree of the appropriate category. So when you're a tree or a rock or a car, and they all are examples of perception, and when we form the concept, we are not focusing on those particulars. They still exist. The particulars still exist. They don't disappear. Abstraction is not denying the existence of the omitted characteristics. All right, but that's a general point. Okay, for instance, the concept, for instance, one of my favorite words again. The concept thought is formed by retaining the distinguishing characteristics of the psychological action. Oh, good, and she's going to give it to us in parentheses. What is that? A purposefully directed process of cognition. All right. Well, I understand that, although I would want to talk about what cognition is, but let's not do that now. And by omitting the particular contents, what it is you're thinking about, the particular thing you're thinking about, as well as the degree of the intellectual effort's intensity. So if I'm thinking about 2 + 2 is 4, or E = mc², it's a different kind of thought, and we're going to omit that intensity dimension, or omit, that is to say, not focus on. We're not going to focus on it, even though it still exists. The concept emotion is formed by retaining the distinguishing characteristics of the psychological action. All right. The distinguishing characters, I guess here, distinguishing emotion from other phenomena of consciousness, such as thought, such as thinking. An automatic, here's the distinguishing characteristic or characteristics, an automatic response proceeding from an evaluation of an existent. Well, that's a particular theory of concepts, but it's probably a true theory. So let's not get into the issue of where emotions come from right now, but that's a description, and it does differentiate emotion from thought, because emotion is not an automatic response. Thought is not an automatic response. Emotion is. So it's a differentiating characteristic. Okay, and by omitting the particular contents, that is whether or not you have fear for a spider, or love for a particular, not love, let's say a great liking for a particular meal, kind of food, something. We're omitting the particular contents, both what kind of emotion it is and the objects of the emotion. Both of those are being omitted, as well as the degree of emotional intensity, whether it was a really strong emotion or a weak emotion. We're not focusing on that and doing this. Okay, so all of this is parallel to what is done with existential concepts. Everything here is an exact parallel. Steve, wake up over there.
Yes, I'm here. That's the last, isn't that?
Well, that's it. we've reached it. We've actually got to the end of all that we are entitled to, I guess. So first of all, you want to say anything else about that material that we just went, any of that material? We're going to go back to anything, either of you, Steve or Bob.
Well, we really have not gotten to abstracting from concepts of consciousness to other concepts of consciousness. And I think we need to get there.
You think so? Of course, there is a whole chapter on abstraction from abstraction, which is coming up. And so, of course, I've got the thing, I got the actual book in front of me, and I can look and see. I mean, I don't remember there was a whole lot, because that issue is taken up in a chapter by itself. In any event, let's see, answers provided by concept from, I don't think I can be sure to be able to identify how much of that gets done in this one chapter. But part of it's got to be in that other chapter on abstraction from abstraction,
that's chapter 3.
Which is chapter 3. So that's already been done. So yeah, okay, we could apply that. Can you apply that to something here? Would you like to apply that to something here without going into the text? Or is that asking too much?
Well, why don't we see if we can apply it with what we know now to the concept of subconscious?
Okay. Now there's something. Yeah, we went through the example. Did we do this? The woman walking down the street, that was perception?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, we did all that. We did that. Okay. I want to look at that for a second before this is directly relevant. The examples were perception, evaluation, thought, reminiscence, imagination. Those are examples. She gave a nice range of examples. Notice that the subconscious is not one of those examples, nor is it anything like any one of those examples. Subconscious is something very different. Now, we haven't defined subconscious maybe for our purposes this week. But anyway, it's not there. And I think it's not there for a good reason. It doesn't fit under the category of an action of consciousness. It's not the subconscious as it's discussed, for example, in OPAR. And, you know, if you look in the objectivist literature for a definition of subconscious, I actually didn't look in Jean Moroney's little book, but I looked in other places. It's very hard to get anything that you would really call a definition. It's very hard. The closest I could find was Dr. Peikoff referring to it as a, actually, I think I have it here, as a storehouse. Why don't I have that here? You know, a place for storing I did have that maybe. Okay, I'm not finding that at the moment. You know, the word storage here applying to memory. I don't like that term. It's not exact. It's a poor analogy to what you do in a warehouse, and that's not how memory works. So I really don't like it. But I don't have we're stuck with the same problem. I don't have the proper words. So I'm going to say what goes on in what's the subconscious? It's basically a storage place for something that gives rise to conscious experiences, is what it is. Now, do you have a?
Let's go a little simpler.
Okay.
Is memory a concept of consciousness?
We went through this last week. I'm happy to do it again. There are two different senses that people use the term memory. One is the conscious experience. Oh, I remember when Bob said this, and this time he said that. You know, I remember these things. That's a conscious experience. That's memory. That is a concept of consciousness.
Okay.
If by memory you refer to the storage of something,
how about if I just refer to the automatic recall?
The conscious experience is a concept of consciousness. The process of recall is not, I would say. You know, the process by which it comes
not
from,
a conscious experience.
there is some in any act of see. I'm going to the science here. We know beyond doubt that when you recall something, there is a neural process, not fully understood at this point. You know, there's a lot of interesting theory about it, but it's not fully understood. But there's a neural process that underlies the recall of any, you know, an event. When you remember something, it's because
probably
it's because stuff happened in your brain that you remember it. The actual experience of remembering it is conscious.
Okay. There are probably neural experiences that underlie all of these concepts of consciousness that we've talked about so far.
Every conscious experience, every kind of conscious experience, as far as I know, is the proximate result of brain activity of one, whatever it is, presumably neural, but brain activity. Every conscious experience are created, caused by neural activities. I think we know that much. Okay. I use the term proximately because, again, this came up last time, but I do want to remind people that we're not brains in a vat. So it really isn't just, you know, it's not the brain, but the proximate, the actual immediate cause of any conscious experience, is a neural process. Yes.
Okay, but
yeah,
do you have to know that in order to know what a thought is?
You can have some knowledge. It's like a whole lot of other things in life. You can know what gold is without knowing that it's atomic number and atomic weight. But its atomic number and atomic weight are facts about gold, and they're true nonetheless. And we learn a lot from science about all kinds of things that we didn't know before. So yeah, you know something about thought. Let me go back to the memory example. How do we know about memory in the first place? It's introspection. Okay, I know you want to go this. Oh, that reminds me. I want to read something from the workshop on this. But let me just say. So we know from our experience. Here's what we know. Here's what I know introspectively. I know that at one point I'm aware of something. Let us say by perception. So I'm going to go back to my tree. You know, I look at a tree and I perceive the tree and I'm aware of it. I also know that at some point goes out of my awareness and I start thinking about something else. Maybe I perceive a squirrel, or maybe I start thinking about, something Steve told me last week, or, I start thinking about something else. And the awareness of the tree has now disappeared from my consciousness. It's gone. But then at some point later, I might sit there and say, oh yeah, I remember now. I saw the tree and I saw the squirrel was in the tree and playing around. I have a memory of what I perceived. That's how you know about memory. And that's how you know about the subconscious. What you know is from introspection is that stuff can be in your mind at one point, disappear, and come back later. That fact is encapsulated or captured by the existence of something that you can call the subconscious. But here's the really important thing. You do not directly introspect the subconscious. You can't. It is impossible.
It's an abstraction.
It is. It is a. I would say it's not. I wouldn't say it's an abstraction. Well, it's an inference. It is an inference from your introspective experience. Children don't know anything about the subconscious. You get them to think about it at some point and say, "Yeah, okay, I understand." But they don't get it by just experiencing it introspectively, because you can't. That's right. By definition, the subconscious is not conscious. That's what it means to be subconscious. It means it is not conscious. So we know about its existence, the existence of subconscious. We know by inference, by thinking, and therefore, I would say, near as I'm able to tell. And I'm getting more firmed up in this as I go along. The subconscious is not a concept of consciousness. Concepts of consciousness are actions of consciousness. The subconscious is not an action of consciousness. QED.
Oh, you're really leaving out all abstractions from concepts of consciousness.
No, I'm not. I'm leaving out
just a couple minutes ago. You defined,
I'm leaving out anything that inference. It's not an attribute of it. It's not an attribute of a state of consciousness. Subconscious is not an attribute of thinking. It's the underlying basis that we're not conscious of. We are not. This is the important thing: is that the subconscious is something that we are not conscious of. So it can't be. You can't abstract from consciousness something that you're not conscious of. You can't do it. So I can abstract the intensity of a thought process. I can abstract the color of an orange from the total experience of an orange, but I can't abstract the subconscious from my experience of an orange. It's impossible, because subconscious is what we're not aware of, by definition. Let me read this thing from Ayn Rand.
If you follow that train of thought,
yeah,
since you can't observe higher level abstractions like justice, you would have to conclude that there isn't such a thing. Since you can't directly perceive it, you're saying
I didn't conclude.
I didn't
conclude.
No, hold it. Let me finish.
Yeah.
You're saying, since I cannot directly introspect subconscious, it's not a concept of consciousness. And I'm saying, well, since you can't directly extrospect justice, it's not a concept of existence.
It isn't. That's a concept of consciousness. I can introspect my concept of consciousness.
Very good.
I can abstract, but I can't introspect the subconscious.
No,
I can't.
And you can't.
I can introspect
perceive justice.
Justice is complicated because you have to reduce it.
Well, let's try one.
Subconscious is not reducible to actions of consciousness. It can't be. It's not reducible that way. Let me read this thing from Ayn Rand, and we'll continue. But let me read this because I think this is important or useful, and it may be useful to you. This is from the workshop section of the same book. Page 224 at the bottom, or near the bottom. Ayn Rand says, all of the concepts of consciousness have one thing in common. All of the concepts of consciousness have one thing in common, that it is a process or an action of consciousness. And it is internal. It is your psychological process versus the outside world. Therefore, you have already separated all of these particular phenomena which you want to conceptualize, and have separated them in a radical way from existential concepts. Now, what Bob wants to do is he wants to incorporate subconscious as one of these things that's separated in a radical way from existential concepts. That's what he wants to do. But I don't think that works. It can't work because she says all of the concepts of consciousness have one thing in common, that it is a process or an action of consciousness. That does not apply here. The subconscious is not an action of consciousness. It isn't conscious. It isn't by its nature, essentially by definition. That's what it is. It's something that's not in conscience. So it doesn't fit that pattern. So I think that settled, in my opinion, that settles the issue. I think.
I don't think so. I think you have a very narrow idea of what consciousness is.
Yeah, consciousness is awareness. And that's the way it's used here in this chapter. And concepts of consciousness are things like, and again, I suggest paying a close attention to the nature of the examples given. Thinking, reminiscing, imagining, evaluating. Those are all of a sort, and they're very different from the subconscious. The subconscious doesn't fit in the overall category. It doesn't have a CCD with thinking.
Is not
what would the CCD be with thinking, reminiscing, emotion, and imagination? It doesn't have one with it. It's not in the same broader category. It's a different sort of thing. It's not an action of consciousness. It isn't. That's not what it is. And so that's the end of it, as far as I can tell.
So an automatic recall of something is not an action of consciousness. That's what you're telling me.
Yes, that's right. Actually, that is correct. Because it's an action of the whole point is the subconscious is, it comes back to this. The subconscious is not conscious, is not consciousness. So yes, if automatic recall is a characteristic of the subconscious, it is by that very fact not consciousness. And I think that's true. The what goes on in recall is not, we just get the product of it. You get the result. When you introspect, you don't, at least I don't, see, some people may have a different kind of mind than I do, but I do not introspect. I went down the corridor in my brain where things are, some kind of library where things are stored. And I went here and I turned left and I pulled out this file drawer and I found this thing. I have no idea what, that's why there's a whole subject of psychology and neuroscience, is because we don't know that kind of thing by introspection. We don't know that. We don't know that. You don't introspect. That is a subconscious activity. So yes, that is not an activity of consciousness. But essentially, that's what it means for something to be subconscious. It's not conscious. If it were conscious, it would be conscious. I'm going around in circles. I like to do that sometimes. That's it. So so I don't think I really think it's very useful to look at her examples and see how her examples are very, very different. The range of examples she gives are similar to each other, but very distinct. I mean, you can't put them on the same CCD with subconscious.
So far, we've only done first level concepts of consciousness.
That's true.
So there's a super chat. True. Let's recognize Jonathan Honig. Thank you.
Oh, good. Hi, Jonathan. Yeah.
And there's a few comments. It says, Bob, yes. Fight back. And Bob,
yeah, Bob is a very mild-mannered individual. He's
well, I'm purposely passive here because Lee makes a case for this, and I've heard this, more than a few times, and I have to agree, but I want Bob to fight back as well.
He's doing. He has his way of fighting back. But Bob, we shouldn't discuss this right now. Let's go ahead. What was this? Was there a question?
No,
super chat question.
No, just
Jonathan just being generous.
Just a little cheerleading. Just a little cheerleading going on there, baby. All right. So go ahead, Bob.
Well, the fight back is that you are dismissing all abstractions from concepts of consciousness.
No, I don't think so. I don't see why that is. I'm just saying that we don't let me think about this for a second. So there's justice in the world. And is justice a concept of consciousness?
No, it's a combination.
Yeah, it's one of these composite things, which we haven't got to that. So is the subconscious, is that a composite concept in your view?
No.
Okay, so then justice is not a parallel anyway.
No.
We want something that would be a pure concept of consciousness. If you want a parallel, that's not a first level. Give me something else, baby.
Well, you want a parallel out in existence? Take an armada.
No, I wanted something, an abstraction that is a concept of consciousness that is somehow like the subconscious. But that I would accept as a concept of consciousness. I'm not sure that I can think of one. We'll have to. I would try to think of one.
You denied one that I think is quite obviously one, and that's memory.
No, I didn't deny memory. I said memory has two senses. In the one sense, it is obviously a concept of consciousness.
Okay, let's
focus on that. In the other sense, it
sense.
isn't.
let's focus on that sense.
Yeah.
So the first level is reminiscing. I recalled it. And now we can say, oh, what I recalled, I'm going to call that memory. So that's a concept of consciousness. You agree?
The experience. When we experience a memory, but when when people say that there's a place, there's a memory storage somewhere.
I didn't say it is
that's different. Okay. All right. That's the distinction I would make. There's a concept of memory is a concept of consciousness. If you mean by it,
what I mean by it is what I recalled when I recalled something. The action was recalling, and the object of that action was memory.
William James.
So I abstracted memory from all those instances when I recalled something, and I found this new abstraction, which I now call memory.
Yeah, but it's just all you're doing there is you're noting that, as William James said, memory is the experience of something. I can't give the exact quote because I'm not that good, but it's basically the experience of something with the additional experience that you have experienced it before. So when you remember something, you remember that you remember that you have the same object that you perceive. Let us say, I'm going to go back to my tree. I remember that I perceived the tree, and I also remember that I perceived the tree. And that's a memory. And that's a conscious experience, and that's no problem. That's a conscious experience. Conscious experiences are conceptualized as concepts of consciousness. That's fine. So I don't have any problem with that. Memory, attention, perception, thought, considering these things as conscious experiences, if you consider them as conscious experiences, those are concepts of consciousness, or they can be conceptualized as concepts of consciousness because they're actions of consciousness. But the subconscious, and it's almost blindingly obvious, is not conscious. You can't abstract it from consciousness because it's not there in consciousness.
So when I automatically recall something, is that an act of consciousness?
Well, again, I think I answered this one already. My immediate response would be no, because it's done by the processes involved are subconscious. They're not conscious. But it's the brain doing it. And in fact, it turns out. See, we know from even general experience, we know that the processes that cause a memory to arise in your mind, that we're not aware of those processes. It's just the thing, we're aware of the product. It comes up in your mind. Later, we find out from science that it's the brain that's doing it. That's a scientific discovery, but it's still true. There's no reason to reject it just because we didn't know it as children. Just because we didn't know something just because we don't know something when we form a concept doesn't mean that isn't a valid identification about that concept. Just because we don't know the atomic number of gold when we first learn about gold doesn't mean that you can say, oh, that's really not a fact about gold. It is a fact about gold. The atomic number of gold, the atomic weight of gold, and various other things that we discover scientifically are all facts about gold. And I'd say it's the same thing about the subconscious. We discover its nature scientifically. That increases our knowledge. It doesn't replace our knowledge, and it doesn't contradict our knowledge. It's new knowledge. And it's true.
So are you saying that there is an aspect of the subconscious that is a concept of consciousness?
No. I would say no, because I go back to what the subconscious.
So the only way we know, hang on.
Yeah.
Your position is that the only way we know that there is a subconscious is because of neurons, etc. Science. We don't know it from internal.
No. What I said about this was not that. I guess we have to go over to Clubhouse pretty soon here. So I'll just say this one thing, and then we should get over to Clubhouse. But let me just say this one thing. We know from introspection, there's evidence from introspection that there's something that we can call the subconscious. But that doesn't mean that we observe the subconscious introspectively. We don't. We observe the phenomena we observe are phenomena. Yeah.
You don't have to observe it introspectively. All you have to do is abstract from what you do observe introspectively.
It's not an abstraction would have to be there, and it's not there. You can't abstract. You can squeeze a stone all you want, and you don't get water out of a stone because it's not there.
I can notice all kinds of automatic things going on, and I can abstract from what is similar in them, and I label that the subconscious. It's a perfectly valid abstraction from concept.
But those things are not the subconscious. The processes that are subconscious, you're not conscious of. That's what it means to be subconscious.
I'm not talking.
That's what it means.
I'm not talking about what implements it. I'm talking about what I do introspect. I introspect that I automatically feel this emotion in this case. I automatically introspect that I have automatically associated this idea and that idea. Those are all concepts of consciousness. I observe them introspectively.
No, when you say, well, let's go over.
You know what's common? What's common in all these actions of my consciousness is that these have occurred automatically. I didn't put conscious thought into them. I'm going to label those things that occur automatically without me consciously thinking about them.
Yeah.
I'm going to label them subconscious.
So let me ask you this. We got to go over to, they're going to wonder if we all died, but I got to ask you this question. Do you say then that that it cannot be discovered that those processes are neural processes?
No.
Are you claiming that?
Sure it can.
Okay. So what I'm claiming is we have discovered that much. So we know that the subconscious processes are neural processes. We know that much.
But that's not the same as what I experienced, which I call the subconscious. And that's all these automated things that I have.
The automated stuff are neural. We discovered. I'm saying, can't we just let's go to Clubhouse, because I think we better check. How do we do?
Okay, I checked. It's there. We just have to show up.
Let's show up before everybody disappears.
Thanks,
let's
gentlemen.
show up. Thank you, everybody, for
thanks, Daniel.
Going up here. We're going to be back in 2 weeks, and I'm not sure. We may talk about perception if I can get Bob to agree that he wants to talk about. He'll do that.
Today's the 9th.
What's the date?
Yeah, 9th.
The 9th. Yes, correct.
Okay, I can do it. All right. So let's go. Probably going to something about maybe even affordances and perception and error and stuff like that. And we may even try to get another combatant in here as well. But anyway, that's my thought at this moment. We haven't decided for sure. Let's go to Clubhouse. Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming, but come with us to Clubhouse and it will get even rougher there. Okay, let's do it, Steve. I'm going to